All right, so last night in the NBA, some teams really flipped the script on what we thought was going to happen.
Definitely some surprises, some real shakeups.
Yeah, like I'm looking at the box scores right now and I'm thinking, okay, we got to unpack this stuff for the
I
fans.
mean, some of these results really shift the whole conversation about where teams stand.
Absolutely. So, like we always do on this deep dive, we're going to pinpoint what really matters.
Right.
The standout plays, the unexpected outcomes, and what it all means for the bigger picture.
Exactly, because, every game tells a story right now.
For sure. All right, so let's start with, well, this one kind of blew me away. Oklahoma City taking down Milwaukee.
121 to 105.
I mean, the Thunder just absolutely dismantling the Bucks. That was not on my bingo card.
Yeah, a lot of people had Milwaukee penciled in for that win.
So what made this upset possible? Like, what were the
Yeah.
keys for OKC?
Well, I think a big part of it was their defense. They were so disciplined, especially on Giannis.
Yeah, I mean, they really shut down his usual drive to the basket.
Exactly. They forced him to pass out, and the Bucks just couldn't find their rhythm from outside.
Which is interesting because the Bucks are usually a pretty solid three-point shooting team.
They are, but the Thunder's defense was just so disruptive last night. They were all over the passing lanes.
It almost seemed like they had Milwaukee's plays figured out.
Yeah, they really seemed to anticipate where the ball was going, and that's tough to play against.
And on the other side, you gotta give Shai Gilgeous-Alexander his due, 48 points.
That's an MVP caliber performance right there.
Yeah.
He was just unstoppable.
I mean, he was hitting everything, floaters, threes, drives to the basket. It didn't matter.
It wasn't just the scoring. He was controlling the pace of the game, making smart decisions.
He really looked like the leader of a team that's ready to contend.
And this win against Milwaukee, that's a huge boost for their confidence and for their playoff hopes.
No doubt. I mean, they're right in the thick of things in the West now.
And, it makes you wonder, did the Thunder expose some weakness in the Bucks game?
Right? Like, is this something other teams will try to copy?
I think so.
Yeah.
Especially those teams in the East who are going to have to face Milwaukee in the playoffs.
It'll be interesting to see if they can replicate that defensive intensity.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on to another game in the West, Minnesota, taking on Utah.
Now, this one wasn't quite the upset that OKC pulled off, but it was still a pretty dominant win for the Timberwolves.
128 to 102.
And Anthony Edwards was just on fire.
41 points, leading the team to their 8th straight win.
I mean, talk about a guy who's hitting his stride at the right time.
Right, he's peaking just as the playoffs are approaching, and that's bad news for the rest of the league.
He was doing it all last night, too. Like, those step-back threes he was hitting were just insane.
And he's getting to the rim with that explosiveness. He's just so hard to guard.
And this is all happening in the West, which is just a bloodbath right now. Every win is huge.
Oh, absolutely. It's like every game is a playoff game in the West.
So with this win, the Timberwolves, they're making a statement that they're not messing around.
They're absolutely serious contenders, and they're showing that they can win consistently.
Now, we got to mention the Jazz were missing some key players in this one.
That's true. Injuries definitely played a role, but you still got to give the Timberwolves credit for taking care of business.
For sure. And it wasn't just Edwards either. Jaden McDaniels had a double-double TA. Dante DiVincenzo was contributing.
It was a real team effort, and that's what you want to see, especially down the stretch of the season.
All right, let's jump over to the East now for the Clippers versus the Hornets.
Now, this one was a bit more of a blowout,
Yeah, the Clippers just cruised to a win, 123 to 88.
and James Harden looked like his old self out there.
31 points, 10 rebounds. That's the James Harden we all remember.
Right, he was attacking the basket, dishing out assists, just controlling the game.
And he seems to be finding a good balance now between scoring and getting his teammates involved.
It's like he's figuring out his role on this Clippers team, which is loaded with talent.
And speaking of talent, Kawhi Leonard had a quiet 23 points. Ivica Zubac, another double-double.
They're a tough team to beat when those three are clicking.
And their defense was stifling last night. They held the Hornets to under 90 points.
After the Hornets had a big scoring game the night before, so that says a lot about the Clippers' defense.
This win really solidifies their spot as a top contender in the West.
I mean, when they're healthy, they're as good as anyone.
And with Harden playing like this, they're going to be tough to stop in the playoffs.
Okay, so let's talk about a game that went down to the wire way. Portland versus Toronto.
The Blazers squeaking out a win, 105 to 102.
Yeah, that was a nail-biter.
Anthony Simons and Tumani Kamara hitting those clutch threes in the fourth quarter.
That was huge. Those shots completely swung the momentum.
I mean, the Blazers were down by like 6 with a minute left, and then boom, they hit those threes.
And you got to give Denny Avdija credit. He was all over the place last night.
That dunk he had in the final seconds was just nasty.
And then he iced the game with those free throws.
He was clutch for sure.
Now, the Raptors, they got some good performances from Jacob Pohl and Ochai Agbaji.
Yeah, they didn't go down without a fight.
But in the end, the Blazers just made a few more plays.
All right, last but not least, the Nets against the Hawks.
The Nets breaking their 3-game losing streak with a win.
122 to 114.
And Cameron Johnson was the man of the hour for Brooklyn.
28 points, leading the team in scoring.
He was hitting shots from everywhere, threes, mid-range, even some tough layups.
Trae Young did his usual thing for the Hawks, 28 points, 12 assists.
But it wasn't enough. The Nets just had a little more firepower last night.
Especially in that fourth quarter, they went on a 10-0 run that pretty much sealed the deal.
Yeah, that was a killer for the Hawks. They just couldn't stop the Nets' momentum.
And with this win, the Nets, they're back above 500.
And they keep their home dominance against the Hawks going.
So we've seen a lot of action last night. Some surprises, some statements, some close calls.
The NBA is always delivering. Yeah. It really is. What are your biggest takeaways from these games?
Well, I think we saw a lot of teams really starting to find their groove as we head into the playoffs.
Like the Timberwolves, for example. They're looking like a real threat.
And the Clippers, they're proving that they can beat anyone when they're healthy.
But then you have teams like the Thunder who are shaking things up and showing that they're not going to be pushovers.
It's going to be a wild ride to the finish line.
For sure.
Yeah.
So I got to ask you, out of all these results, which one do you think has the biggest implications for the playoffs?
Oh, that's a tough one. But I got to go with the Thunder beating the Bucks.
Really? Why is that?
I think it shows that the Bucks, they're not invincible and that other teams can exploit their weaknesses.
So you're saying this loss could come back to haunt Milwaukee in the playoffs?
It's definitely possible, especially if they face a team that can replicate what the Thunder did defensively.
That's a great point. Something to keep an eye on for sure.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for our deep dive today, but I think we covered a lot of ground. We did. And I gotta say, this is why we love the NBA, right? It's full of surprises and excitement.
You never know what's going to happen on any given night.
So to all our listeners out there, keep watching, keep following your teams, and we'll be back soon to break down even more NBA action.
Until then, enjoy the games.
See, you're out.